like to first thank you all for coming. And okay, there it is. There we go. Hold on one second. Hold on. Let me just change my share screen. Let me pause across the board. And without their help, this event wouldn't be possible. Before we introduce them, I'm going to mention a couple of things about the format of today's event and some resources that you might find helpful. I know we're all experts on Zoom by now after 18 months of a pandemic, but as a quick reminder, please stay muted throughout the entire time. You can mute yourself by clicking the microphone button in the bottom left corner. We also encourage you to turn on your video so we're not talking into a black void. It's not very fun. Also, this event will be recorded, so just FYI. And like Gina said, please save all of your questions for the breakout room in regards to for our panelists. If you have them for the format, please type them in the chat. For today's agenda, I'll first tell you about some resources for preparing for grad school. Then the panelists will introduce themselves and tell us about their backgrounds. We'll then get into the general panelist questions. And finally, we'll have the breakout rooms where you can ask the panelists more specific questions. Okay, to start with some resources, if you go to UCSD's Psychology Department website, you can find the link to our YouTube channel and our contact information under the Undergraduate Resources tab of the website. There's also the UCSD's grad program website, which also has helpful information about grad school life and information specific to UCSD. For undergrads, there are funding opportunities like the STARS program that involves an 8-week program over the summer, and anyone, even if you're not a UCSD student, is eligible for this. They also do GRE prep. A quick note on the GRE, because a lot of people were interested in this. Some programs, including UCSD's psychology program, do not require the GRE anymore. As time progresses, fewer and fewer schools will require the GRE. If you still have questions about the GRE, please feel free to email me or Gina about this. And also, if you're a UCSD student, you can also Google UCSD Trells, and that will give you more information about internal funding. I would also like to mention Colors of the Brain. I would suggest checking out some of their resources and research opportunities they have if you're interested in neuroscience. One last thing before I introduce the panelists. To briefly introduce potential careers you can have after getting a PhD, I made a word cloud of the initial jobs that graduates from the UCSD psychology program have gotten since the 1970s. And I think this generally is reflective of other PhD programs as well. As you can see, most become postdocs. And if you don't know what a postdoc is, they can be defined as an individual holding a doctoral degree who's engaged in a temporary period of mentored research and or scholarly training for the purpose of acquiring the professional skills needed to pursue a career path of his or her choosing. The reason I said that so fast is because we have a postdoc here, Nadia, and she'll say something about that when she introduces herself. You can also see that a lot of end up as professors. And in the smaller text, you can see that some end up in private research or industry at specific jobs. And now we'll be meeting the panelists. I'll first say their name, and then if the panelists could give a brief intro about themselves, including what stage of your career you're in and what your area of study is, and a little bit about your path to graduate school. We'll first start with Leslie.
Hi, my name is Leslie Carver. I am a professor at UC San Diego in the psychology department. I'm also provost at Thurgood Marshall College. It says stuff about me. I grew up in a small town in central Minnesota. This picture behind me is the lake where I grew up, which sounds fancy, but it's not because everybody in Minnesota gets to grow up on a lake. I mostly study early development in children with autism and infants who have a sibling with autism. We're interested in how babies learn about social events and how to anticipate different sorts of things. And we're interested in both sort of strengths of kids on the autism spectrum as well as challenges. And we do a lot of that by measuring brain activity in little kids and babies. And I'll just leave it that for now. Oh, wait, my path to grad school. I'm winding and confused.
Great summary, Leslie. All right, and next up we have Dalio.
Hi, my name's Dalia. I'm a third year, not in psychology, but actually in one of my doctoral programs between San Diego UCSD. I'm in the Language and Communicative Disorders program. What's really cool about the program I'm in is I'm also getting my clinical certification to be a licensed speech language pathologist. But even then, I can go to become a professor even with that licensure. And so I'm interested in studying bilingualism, cognition, and aging, specifically in Alzheimer's disease, because there's not a lot of research on bilinguals with Alzheimer's. And my path to my PhD was filled with doubt at first, but then, you know, as you move forward, you become a lot more sure in your choices.
Awesome. Thank you, Dalio. And next up, we have Dania.
Hi, everybody. My name is Dani Ibrahim. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a first year in the experimental psychology PhD program here. I'm a first generation Palestinian American. I just graduated from the Georgia Institute of Technology in spring 21. So very recently I was in your position and remember the challenge that it is to think about applying to grad school, but also how rewarding this part of my college career was. And so I'm really excited for all of y'all. I am primarily interested in learning methodologies and factors impacting educational experiences and my path to getting to graduate school, which I'm sure I will talk about a little bit more through these questions. In brief, it was also a bit confusing because I had no idea what a PhD even was when I got to college. So there was a lot of learning. There was a giant learning curve to it, but overall it was exciting nonetheless.
Awesome. Thank you. Seems to be a common theme of confusion here so far. All right. And then next up is Daphne.
Hi all, I'm so pleased to be joining you and thanks for making time to come to this. So my name is Daphne Pelton. I'm a first year student in another joint doctoral program here. It's the Joint Doctoral Clinical Psychology program between UCSD and SDSU. A little bit on my background is, you know, where to begin. So I'll start with like my research now. I'm studying health disparities, specifically within the lens of HIV research, and I'm looking at minoritized populations, both racial and ethnic minorities and sexual and gender minorities. And I also have an interest in substance use disorders. My path to graduate school was definitely a non-linear series of stepping stones. And I'm happy to kind of go into detail about that with anybody who wants to know more. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. Okay. Next up is Nadia.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nadia. I am currently a postdoctoral researcher at the Salk Institute. So I went to UCSD for neuroscience PhD program, and I recently graduated and moved across the street during the pandemic. So that was convenient. I actually, when I was a freshman, I did an internship in the summer in the psych department at UCSD. So I went to a liberal art school in Vermont, Middlebury College. So we didn't have a lot of opportunities for like summer research internships. So I actually emailed Professor John Cyrensis, and somehow he decided to give me an opportunity. So I came to San Diego and I learned a little bit about the brain and what graduate school was all about. So that was kind of at the end of the summer. I decided that I would give it a shot, and that's kind of where my path to graduate school started. And I would be happy to talk more about the research or work at the intersection of psychology and neuroscience.
Awesome. Thank you. And then there goes. Last up is Jamal. I think you might be muted, Jamal. Oh, there we go.
All right. Hello. I'm Jamal. I'm a fourth year PhD student in the UCSD psychology department. I actually am joint advised. So I work with one advisor where I focus on cross-modal perception, like how audition influence vision and vice versa. And with another advisor, I focus more on the interactions between like working memory, like short-term memory and long-term memory, and how those two primary systems interact. I got my undergrad at UCSD and then traveled all over the United States to try and find a grad program that might fit my interests. And lo and behold, didn't really go anywhere. Stayed at UCSD and, loving it. It was really great. So I think that if you guys have any questions about traveling all over the United States to find a program that really fits you. I'm also like a non-traditional student. I worked for several years while my partner went through her undergrad and her master's degree actually in speech pathology. And then we traded off once she found a comfortable position. We did the same, and I got interested in research through community colleges. I was just exploring the gen ed that I had to take as I started to pursue my bachelor's. So certainly a non-traditional path that I took. It sounds like it's maybe not that non-traditional. Everybody kind of had a non-traditional path. But yeah, that's more or less my story in a nutshell.
Awesome. Well, I love hearing everyone's stories. So I think we'll have an exciting time hearing the answers to these next questions. As long as I can get the slides to advance. All right, there we go. So we'll be covering two broad topics today: preparing for graduate school and applying to graduate school. And just a quick reminder about the format. Please remember that this is being recorded. And if you have a question, please wait until the breakout rooms to ask it. But if you have a question about the format, please just type it in the chat and then Gina will be moderating it. All right, let's dive into the questions. So the first question is deciding to go to graduate school is a big decision. So my first question to the panelists is, why did you decide to go to grad school? And how did you know that it was right for you? Let's go ahead and start with Leslie.
Yeah, so somebody else said this, like they didn't really know what a PhD was until they same. I had this kind of widening route, and I took some time off, and then when I went back, I was taking all of these developmental psychology classes. I thought I wanted to be a doctor, because like an MD, not a real doctor, because where I sat in the front of his class and I raised my hand and I asked a bunch of questions, and that was kind of what I did in most of my classes. And grad students were teaching my classes, and postdocs that were teaching my classes started telling me, didn't know what they meant, but they sort of coached me on, go talk to professors, get some research experience. So I went and talked to this professor who I knew from my introductory developmental psych class. And he said, I said, I think I want to go to med school. And he said, you don't want to go to med school. And I was like, I don't, why? And he said, because you like to ask questions about why things happen instead of just memorizing things. And he was right. I really was very interested in like sort of the theoretical stuff behind some of the things that he was teaching. So that's kind of how I started learning about graduate school. And then I just sort of did it. I feel a little bit like I fell into it because I didn't really know what I was doing, but I was kind of fortunate to have people that would sort of take me by the shoulders and push me in directions and say, you got to go do this. And then you really lucky that way.
Awesome. Thank you, Leslie. That's a great answer. And then next up, we'll have Dalio.
So I also did not know what a PhD was going into undergrad. I'm a first-gen student, so my parents didn't even graduate high school, much less attend college. And so my original plan was I was going to be a Spanish teacher after undergrad. And so I majored in Spanish and in linguistics, but then I was in the honors program in undergrad. And they were like, you need to do research for your senior thesis. So that's how I got into research, and then working as an research assistant in a lab for 2 years, doing a thesis. And then I also worked in that lab as a lab manager after graduating. Really solidified I'm like, this is something I can see myself doing long-term and potentially for the rest of my life. And so I fell into it because I was in the honors program and needed to do a senior thesis, not knowing what a senior thesis was, not knowing undergrads could work in labs while they were in undergrad. So yeah, that's how I decided to go to grad school.
Great. Thank you for that answer, Dalio. And next up, we'll have Dania.
Hello again. So at the beginning of my undergraduate career, I went in being pre-med, like Dr. Carver also had mentioned she had done. And I had done that because my initial reaction, which is something a lot of people go into college with, is I want to help people. And what are the careers that I know will help people? And doctor is one of the ones up there. And also as a child of immigrants, you know, doctor, lawyer, engineer as your three options. So I really didn't know anything else outside of that. Anyway, getting into like my second year of college, I started recognizing that the classes that I was taking that were a part of my pre-med minor were just not enjoyable, that I wasn't willing to put in the work. And I know something about myself, which is that if I care about the outcome of something, no matter what the work to get there is, I'll put in the work. And I recognize that it just wasn't in my heart and it wasn't where my passions were. So I spent a couple years really digging deep into what is it that my passions are, and also where are my strengths already at. And one of those strengths that I have always had is thinking of new ideas, questioning things about the world. I'd always loved reading and writing. Those were the classes in what, like English classes were where I excelled, and especially classes where I got to analyze different data and present it in a way to a classroom. And I recognized that all of my skill sets were already here. And I toyed around with several different options of what I could do after undergrad. And I kind of started with like, what job could I get that kind of fills the skill set and level of interest that I have. And I started at the job market first, and then looked at which schooling I would need to get there. And as somebody that was a neuroscience major in undergrad, I realized that almost anything that I would want to do would require some level of graduate school. So there was that component there, but there was another component in which I really learned about what a PhD was. And I realized that I was so excited to go to more school in which I was told to do research. And so I just realized it was something I was excited about. And I mentioned that because I think it's really important that if you're going into a PhD, and I might touch on this later too, but if you're going into a PhD, it's important to not only do it for the outcome of getting a PhD. And I recognized there, like when I learned about what a PhD, I was excited to go to 5 years of school to learn more about this topic that I'm really interested in, which is education, as I mentioned earlier, and get to invest in contributing knowledge to the world about it before I was even done with my degree. And I think that's something so special about being a part of a PhD, is that you're a student and you're taking in knowledge, but you're also contributing it at the same time. And so it felt like a really fulfilling role for me. And that's what ended up making me apply to my PhD program.
Awesome. Thank you for that answer. And then next up will be Daphna.
I wish I could elect Dania to be my spokesperson, because there's just so much similarity in our stories. And I hope that our communication continues after this event, because I'm just learning we have so much in common. So I'm going to echo a lot of what Dania and Dr. Carver already said, which is, as a first generation student, as first generation American, parents or immigrants, what you hear is like doctor, engineer, lawyer, like these are your options. And when I got to college, it was such an eye-opening experience, and it was so thrilling and exciting. I did start as pre-med because I love sciences, but I was so thrilled by the environment. I loved professorship. I just wanted to be all of my professors, and I really admired them and looked up to them. So for me, realizing I wanted to go to grad school had a lot to do with the people I was looking up to for like the first time, and the new people in my life. I was like, wow, these people are so smart, and they just love what they're doing, and they're passionate, and they get to like teach other, they get to go into the community and uplift others. And I saw that as like a huge opportunity. So I was like, okay, well, how does one become a professor? Like, what does that even mean? So I switched from pre-med and I bounced around to a bunch of different things. In undergrad, I settled with neuroscience, art history, and psychology, because I was one of those, science versus art, can't pick one of people kind of people. I really identified that I had to go to grad school, a PhD. After I graduated, I gained more experience working in clinical research settings. I worked for several years after undergrad, and I realized in order to have a more direct impact in people's lives, I wanted to kind of have more independence and a little bit more, what's the word? It's not power as much as like to be able to really design interventions and help people more directly, especially people that I found were falling through the cracks. So that's how I learned I needed to go this PhD route.
Awesome. Thank you, Daphne. It sounds like you're doing really important work also. So thank you for that too. And then next up is Nadia.
Okay, hi. This is a great question, especially for me. So I grew up in Thailand, and PhD in neuroscience definitely wasn't a thing. Like when I was in middle school or high school in Thailand, and then I came across this textbook, Fundamentals of Neuroscience, and I did not know English at the time. So I, of course, understood nothing, right? So I was flipping through this, textbook, and I saw that after kind of each concept, after the fact that each concept is being explained, that's like, this parenthesis, right? And there's a name, comma, and there's a year, right? I didn't know what that meant. And then I found out that, that's kind of what people do, right? They go to grad school, they do research, and then they publish their findings, right? And then, so that was kind of my first experience, or my first exposure to like neuroscience or like grad school. So then a few years after that, I decided to try to come to the States, right? And then I went to a small school. And so we didn't really have a lot of opportunities to do research. So then in the summer, I came to UCSD as a freshman, and I was in Professor John Surin's lab just for the summer. And then it was just really fun. People were really excited like every day about what they were doing. Like they're like running experiments, right? Talking about different papers. And by the end of the summer, right, I was like saying bye to people. And then I realized that my like research summer ended, but for everybody else who was in the lab, it kept going. And that's kind of what I wanted for myself. So I thought that after that summer, I wanted to, keep doing more like full-time ish, right, research. So that was kind of when I decided that grad school was something that I wanted to try to pursue. Yeah.
Awesome. And you'll probably touch on this later, but was that a specific program that you did with Dr. Spence, or?
Yeah, actually, that's a really great question. When so that was 2011. I want to say 2011 or 2012. So at the time, UCSD did not, well, to my knowledge, right, UCSD did not have like official like STAR program, or like the Color of the Brain just got started this year, I think. So at the time, there were like really no official ways for me to be a part of the program, or to do like summer internships. So I actually just cold emailed like 50 labs actually across the States, and like I think 5 people responded to me, and one of them was Professor Spence, and he said, yeah, sure, you could work with some grad students. So I kind of unofficially worked with, like I think 3 grad students in the lab at a time for 3 months. But I think now, right, as you mentioned, there are a lot of programs where you can actually apply and actually get paid as well. So for me, I volunteer in the lab. Yeah.
Well, great that you did that, because now you're here. All right, great answer. And then next up is Jamal.
Yeah, I think it's great that Dr. Spence has responded. He's really awesome advisor, tutor, support system. He's all around great as a professor. So I was working part-time when I went to community college, and kind of did a scattergun approach for just kind of whatever was, spoke to me as a person. And I was taking my gen ed while I was also pursuing music theory and stuff. I taught myself really terrible Spanish, so I was pursuing that on a more academic level. I had always been quite an inquisitive person, and what seemed to be a real hot topic at the time was like big data. And so I was pursuing like data analysis, like coding, statistical analysis, and then human behavior. So I'd always been interested in that. And I was working part-time, and I was able to, going on campus, I was able to take advantage of a lot of these events where they would like bring people kind of like this. They weren't on Zoom at the time, but they would bring people and they would talk about various careers. And I kind of at the time didn't really realize like, oh, holy crap, like they'll teach you how to be good at research. Like you don't just have to know how to do that. And so learning that was a career path that, that they trained you at, and that was something that you learned, and it was a skill that you developed over time, really interested me. And so at that point, I started pursuing a psychological research background. And when I went to, when it was time for me to transfer, I started looking for all sorts of summer programs. And whereas Nadia didn't really have as many resources available to her, there were like several summer programs for me to apply for. And I applied for like 15 of them. And it sounds like a lot, but you apply for one and you realize, oh, I can just kind of tweak these minor things and apply to a bunch of them. And one of them offered like funding and gave me the opportunity to explore like molecular neuroscience, which I thought was like a really cool opportunity. And they, paid me a little bit. So it was like a perfect opportunity over summer, and it was really great. And I realized that inquisitive nature that I had, more or less throughout my life, could be really funneled through research, where I could ask these questions, develop a test for my questions, produce data, analyze that data, and then write that up and share that. And I thought that was just like such a fun, cool experience. And in my undergrad role, there was really like no risks. I just got to do whatever I wanted, and that really kind of sparked a deep interest in me in pursuing questions in neuroscience and cognition. And I had really great advisors at that time who really helped us, just become this sort of scientist that we wanted to be. It didn't really like confine us to anything. Like Leslie said, they didn't necessarily like point us and say, you do this, but they kind of said, you could do this. How can I help you do these? How can I help you take this next step? And that was just such a wonderful experience. And I didn't really follow that molecular neuroscience route. I got more into memory and cross-modal perception because I was really interested in music and thought and memory. And it was kind of more like, it really seemed in the moment like a really like stepping stone. Like everything just kind of followed this nice real progression for me.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for those amazing answers. So it seems like a lot of people just kind of found that they really enjoyed doing the process of it. They got one opportunity and they're like, wow, this is awesome. That's similar to what happened to me as well. I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. So let's move on to the next question. So aside from even making the decision of going to grad school, there's a lot of preparation involved that must be done in order to even get into grad school. So this next question asks, how did you prepare for graduate school? And of those things, what did you think were the most helpful in preparing you? And I know some of you already touched on this. So let's go ahead and start with Leslie again.
Yeah, so I did a lot of research. I worked in a lab with the person who would ultimately become my grad school advisor. Really, really enjoyed doing research and thought that was a great experience. I also did a summer program similar to several people. It was more in clinical psychology because I thought I might want to be a clinical psychologist. So I did that summer program and realized I do not want to be a clinical psychologist. It was not as nearly as fascinating as like measuring brain responses to things in kids and thinking about how the brain develops. So that was actually really useful because it was something that I thought I was very interested in. And it was not a terrible experience. It was fine, but it just was not as fascinating to me. That's pretty much it. I was really fortunate to be able to work in that lab for a long time. And eventually my PI got some funding, was able to pay me a little bit to help out with his research. So that released me from having the kind of crappy job I had working in the university library. And that was pretty much all I did. I went straight into grad school after I graduated, and that was really good experience for me. So
awesome. Thank you, Leslie. And then next up is Dalio.
Yeah, so like I said before, I did do research in a lab for 2 years as an undergrad. One of the really cool things about the lab that I worked in is they had a grant from NSF that would fund, they were called PIRE projects, Partners in International Research and Education. And the way that it worked was we were given the opportunity to travel to other labs abroad and collect data for a senior thesis there. So I also went in the winter quarter of my last year to the University of Scotland to collect data for my senior thesis there, which I think is really cool and possibly made me stand out in some of the grad school applications. So I also completed a senior thesis. And then even after graduating, I didn't apply to grad school straight out of undergrad. I did work as a lab manager for a full year. And it was during that year that I applied to graduate school. And then also in undergrad, I did have 2 jobs like from my 2nd to 4th year at all times. So this was on top of the research and the school. So I had a lot of different things I was doing throughout my undergrad career.
Awesome. Thank you, Dalio.
Mhm.
And then next up is Dania.
So I didn't know that I was preparing for graduate school when I was preparing for graduate school. I went to the Georgia Institute of Technology, like I mentioned, and that's a very big research school. And when I first came in as a first year, really, my mentality was I want to make the best of this experience here. And if this school is known for research, then I might as well do research. So it was a very happy accident. I had a professor in my first class in my first semester of undergrad that I really loved, that I thought taught better than any professor that I'd had before then. Or I guess it was my first semester professors, but any teacher generally that I'd had before then. And I went to his lab, asked if I could help out with projects, and the rest is history. He led a education psychology lab, and that ended up being exactly what I realized that my deepest passions had always been in. So I think that it was a bunch of happy accidents. And I think what really stood out to people on my applications, what I've been told has stood out, was that I took initiative in the lab, and I invested a lot of time in continuing on projects. And so by the time that I was applying, I could speak to what I did in those labs. And that was really what mattered. It doesn't matter like how many labs you were a part of, or it matters what you can speak on that you did about the research, that you can say that you learned something from it. And so that's how I think I best prepared for it. But outside of research, which is the biggest component of going into a research-oriented degree, I think that just investing into things that I liked and stood out to professors as well. I got asked about those things a lot in interviews, and I think that it showed. Like I was executive director of TEDx Georgia Tech, and I got to talk a lot about how planning events for people was not so different than planning a research project, from doing all the background research on what works properly and what's worked in the past and what we need to build upon, to setting up the event, which is like the actual research project, to being able to share it with the world. Like I would draw connections with everything that I did in my undergrad. I was like, I ran a marathon, so I know how to set a long-term goal, and getting your PhD is like running a marathon. So anything that you did that you can connect to how you can be an asset to somebody's lab and how you can continue to contribute to this body of knowledge in your research field is preparing for grad school, I think.
Great, thank you. And then next up is Daphne.
All right. So how did I prepare for grad school? Similarly to Dania, I was kind of seeking out opportunities that aligned with my interests and really following passions before I knew graduate school was an option. I think so very much of this comes down to luck, opportunity, privilege, whatever happens to be around you as a resource that's available to you. And as much as I would love to take credit for all the things that I got myself involved in, a lot of it was opportunities presented themselves. I was in the right place at the right time and knew the right people, and I went for it. So I think the biggest thing about how I prepared for grad school is I went for the opportunities that presented themselves and didn't kind of hold back. I was always going for it. So I did work several different jobs in undergrad in research. And then also after graduation, I continued working several research jobs. The labs, because I knew I wanted to be a professor and because I really liked the teaching and the engagement aspect, I sought out undergraduate awards and opportunities to do research that were tied with teaching. So like TA-ships, independent research projects. These are things that at the time I would just, it felt right. And I was like, let's explore this more. I think the most important thing though, is as I took on more, explored different jobs in different fields, I constantly remained open to changing direction because I was going in with it with the mindset of, this is either going to confirm that I like this, or it's going to tell me I should go in a different direction. And that was constantly the mindset I maintained through undergrad and after of, okay, I'm doing kind of my own confirmatory analysis here. I'm going to try this job on, and if it is what I think it is, and I really love it, I'm going to keep in this direction. And if I learn that there are things I don't like, I'm going to go in a different direction while I try to navigate figuring out where I belong and what my purpose is. So I think keeping that open mind of it doesn't have to be linear and you don't have to be in one exact track from the beginning to the end, letting yourself like meander and gravitate towards the things that make you excited is really important. And I think you've heard that among all the speakers so far. I think the advantage of letting yourself meander and letting yourself get pulled into different directions is every single job I took really pushed me to gain a new skill set. So as Dania said, like whether I was planning conferences or setting my own personal goals, those are the things that after some years made me a competitive applicant by the third time that I applied. So I applied to graduate school over and over and over, knowing that that was what I wanted to do. But I think by the time I got in, being able to describe how all my experiences were connected, exactly what Dania said, like you need to think about what all along was the thread connecting where I was going. Like when I look back and my steps weren't exactly connected, but what was the thing I was chasing all along? Like, what is my own personal like dragon here? And seeing how they're connected and what are the values that are connecting those things? And then what are the skills, describing the skills you learned along the way, you can then apply them to any goal going forward. So a big thing for clinical psych applicants, if you're out there, I recognized early on that even though I wanted to be a researcher, being a clinical psychologist obviously requires clinical experience as well. And that was a weakness in my application. So I volunteered a ton in the communities that I wanted to work with. And I took on a lot of leadership roles in order to fulfill those gaps. And a big tip I have, my secret weapon, and I think this was mentioned already, was the cold email. The cold email was, I think, is the most underrated tool you have to prepare for graduate school. Anytime I read a paper and I liked it, I cold emailed the authors. If I went to a talk and I liked the speaker, I cold emailed the speaker. I think I sent hundreds of cold emails, and all of those kind of resulted in coffee chats and small talks and meet my colleague here and talk to this person here. And have you thought about this direction, or what about this research? And so it expanded my mind and other opportunities. So like, don't be afraid to, I think, put yourself out there and kind of go out on a limb, take the opportunities, send the cold emails, and don't be afraid to just go for something that's interesting because you don't know what it'll evolve into eventually.
Awesome. Thank you. And then next up is Nadia.
Yes, I think it has been established that research before applying is important, and it could give you perspectives on what you like and what you don't like. So as a quick example, so I actually worked in a rodent physiology lab for, I think, a year and a half, like just like, on and off after school, like after classes, right? And I didn't get to do much because, as an undergrad, like, the IRB protocols and things like that, right? So, but based on that experience, I knew that that's not something that I would like to be doing in grad school. I would rather work with human subjects and, maybe potentially using computational methods. And so I mentioned that in my grad school application that, I had tried this, but, I learned whatever, from that. And also like going forward, I would like to be doing these other things instead, right? So I think it's good to learn what you like and what you don't like, right? Grad school is a few years long. So it's good to kind of have some exposure before you apply. And then another thing that I think was really helpful for me was reading. So I try to read a lot of different papers or, like blog posts on like recent findings in the field that I was applying. So I was applying to both psychology and neuroscience programs. And especially I was interested in like using cognitive modeling to study complex cognitive functions in healthy, but also diseased populations. And so I try to, like look up papers and try to read up on what's going on in the field. So then I could see if whatever I'm hoping to do, right, in grad school has already been done or how much has been done. So that was really helpful. And also like learning how much you don't know or like what aspects you need to improve on or you're hoping to improve on was really helpful. So I actually addressed that in my letter that, like in grad school, I'm hoping to learn about all these different experimental methods, but also computational techniques, right? That together could help me gain better understanding on the question of how like people make decision under different circumstances or something like that. So yeah, I think reading was very helpful for me.
Awesome, thank you. And last person for this question is Jamal.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just like amazed. I think these scientists that you've heard from so far have just had such rich experiences, and it's really hard for me to add anything novel. I think they've really like hit so much of the experiences that you hear a lot for other scientists in all sorts of different fields. Maybe I could just like echo some points, like what Daphna and Danya and Nadia said. I think that when I was in community college, I looked for lots of opportunities. So, I mean, all of you being here at the Paths to PhD is already a perfect opportunity. They already talked about cold emailing. So don't be afraid to cold email us. I've been like waiting to throw my email in the chat, and I'll definitely do that. And you should cold email us. Like, it doesn't matter even if you're tangentially related to anything that we do. Like, we could know someone that we could connect you with who you then email, who just opens you up to so many new experiences. So I think, on the one hand, just being really in control of your experience and your growth and just looking out for things. And you're here at this Path to PhD, and Danya does this cool thing that I'm maybe it's not like perfectly in line with my thing, but that seems cool. Let me email her and see like, how she did this, or if she knows anybody who maybe does this other thing that seems related. I think that taking control of your own experiences is a lot less maybe risky than it might seem at first. You just do those things, and the people on the other end of these emails, I think, are going to be so much more receptive than you might have otherwise thought. I know that there would be emails that took me days to compose, and I would just be like full of sweat, and the heart rate would hit 120. And then, I emailed them, and they're like, yeah, love to hear from you. This sounds great. Like, let's meet and get coffee, or come to my lab. I would love to fund you for a summer. Like so much amazing opportunities are out there. And I think like just taking control of that and just reaching out is going to be such a great experience. And so for me, in short, how did I prepare for grad school is I did that. I looked for experiences that were available at my community college. And I just applied for everything. I just reached out for everything. Like, you wouldn't believe how much my partner had to just push me to submit these emails, to submit these applications. And she's just like, just do it. And then, grant funding started rolling in, amazing experiences started rolling in. And I got opportunities to pick things that were really amazing that I would have never done otherwise. And I think, not to just repeat myself a million times, but just if there's anything that you have any interest in, I mean, the worst you can get is sorry, not right now. But you can use those materials that you use even for a no, and you can just change 3 words sometimes and submit that to an application that's 10 times better and is much more related to your interests, or gives you more money, gives you freedom. Like the job that the summer internship that I told you guys about, offered me enough money that I was able to quit my job, and then I was able to focus solely on my research and my undergrad career. And I think that was a really phenomenal experience, because I quit my job and I said, okay, if I'm really going to quit, I'm just going to put everything into all of this, do whatever I can. And it really made me competitive, you know, on a lot of different fronts. And yeah, I don't want to, you know, overstay my welcome on the mic here, but just if anything even seems like remotely interesting to you guys, like, reach out. Nobody's going to be offended. That they'd love to hear from you, I promise.
Yeah, especially here at UCSD, everyone's very friendly. Everyone has to serve fine. Yeah, thank you everyone for those great answers, and thank you, Jamal, for summarizing them and making my job easier. So in light of how much time we have left, I want to skip this question because I think we already touched on it a little bit, and we're going to skip into this next section. We have like 10 minutes before we go into breakout rooms. So also, speakers, please keep that in mind. We have about 10 minutes, so keep your answers concise. So yeah, there was a lot of interest in this question from people who RSVP'd and came here. And it's a large question of how did you choose which programs to apply for and which topic did you pursue? And then also, how did you choose your faculty advisors on top of that? They're all very related questions. And we'll go ahead and start with Leslie.
This is so messy. I did research on brain development and memory as an undergrad, and I really wanted to do autism. So I went to similar areas.
Leslie, I think we lost you there for a little bit.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, if you don't mind just repeating it.
Oh, yeah. Basically, I just had the worst grad school applications, but then I got a big NSF fellowship. So all these places I had applied where I just wrote terrible applications, didn't know what I was doing. I had some help identifying places, but not with the application. Then they were all like, oh yeah, you have money, come on in. And I ended up going to the same place that I had it was the only place that accepted me before I got the fellowship. It turned out to be a good thing for me. I don't know if I would recommend writing a crappy grad school application and staying where you were an undergrad. It worked out for me. And I got really fortunate because my advisor, I had the one advisor, and then there was somebody else I worked with as a grad student, and they were both phenomenal and such good mentors that I'm still incredibly grateful to them. So I lucked into it like everything else, I feel like.
Awesome. Thank you, Leslie. And then next up is Dalia.
Yeah, so I was a bit geographically bound when I was applying for grad school. So I only applied to 4 programs in Southern California. And I was I don't want to say I was indiscriminate about what I was applying to do. I knew I wanted to do something in bilingualism. But here I was like, I want to work with older adults. I also applied to another program. I'm like, oh, maybe doing bilingualism in kids is also interesting. So I had the central theme of wanting to do work in bilingualism, but geography it did dictate it a bit for me, which I know some people were saying, you know, they applied to 15 programs, whatever. I applied to 4. But the cold email was my best friend to make sure I was not wasting an application, because I don't know if it's been mentioned already, but not all faculty can take grad students every single year. This can be, and so it also comes down to a game of luck, you know, who has the funding or the space to take grad students that year. And so I reached out to everyone that I was applying to work with, made sure that they were taking graduate students, that they'd be interested, did a few Skype calls before even applying. And then that also helped me choose, you know, who did I want to list on my application as like people I'd want to work with for each program.
Awesome. Thank you. And then next up is Dania.
Yeah, so when I was choosing topic, it was really the short answer of it is I recognized that it was something that I cared about all of my life and was so interested in going more into and was willing to dedicate all this time to. When I was looking at programs, I was bound in the sense that as a child of an immigrant, there was a lot of fear of me moving too far from home. I am far from home currently, but I have a lot of extended family in the area. So if that's an issue for you, know that there is still so much opportunity if you're geographically bound, like Dalia mentioned. And so I applied to places that I had extended family or immediate family or like strong connections in. And how did I choose my faculty advisors? Basically, how I went about this was I identified the topic that I wanted, and I knew that I did not want to settle for studying something that I didn't care about. And I also know that it's not beneficial to the program or the advisor for me to be forcing a topic that I am not passionate about. So I was very specific about my topics. I didn't just want a PhD in something. I wanted a PhD in educational psychology, and this exact research that I'm doing right now. So I looked for schools that offered research that I was interested in. It took a lot of Googling, a lot of looking in the cities that I was constrained to and searching through all of their psychology programs and looking at all of the write-ups of all of the people in their department. But that's how I ended up finding advisors I was passionate about. And also touching on a point Dalia mentioned, always email the professor. It's not only a giant time saver, but also some professors have admitted to not even looking at applications for people that have not emailed them before. So you could really be hurting your chances if you don't reach out first. And sometimes you get an interview or like a conversation with them before interview week or before the applications have even gone through. That really helps your chances. So absolutely reach out. And I'll talk more if we get to the question about why to be specific about what you want to do. I'll give some more advice on that, but be certain you want to study what you want to do. It'll help you a lot in explaining why you want to be there, and it'll help a lot in the application process.
Awesome. Thank you. And then next up is Daphne.
I was extremely strategic. So I applied 3 times, which I disclosed earlier, and that's not super uncommon in clinical psych. A lot of people have to apply multiple times because it's just like a crapshoot. Oh my gosh, I just said that on a recording. So when I approached applying, I also started geographically thinking about where would I want to live for 5 to 6 years. And I knew I wanted to be in California. I wanted to be in California for a number of years. I'm from the East Coast, and I picked pockets of the country that I thought would be like the most inclusive and safest given my other identities. And I was like, okay, California seems like it's where it's at, and also where like some of my favorite programs are. So after I knew what states I would apply to, anybody who's in clinical psych, go out and buy the APA's book on clinical psych programs. It's a book like this big, and it has every single clinical psych program in America and California. In America and Canada, all of the accredited ones. And I just sectioned out all the states that I was like, yep, I would go to this state, and read cover to cover every single program, and found the ones that aligned with like my own values and ethos as their modalities. And I looked at their stats of like, what were the incoming statistics? Where did people go after they graduated? What were the test requirements? What seemed competitive, and which ones were going to like prepare me to do the kind of work. So after I identified the schools, I purely identified schools that way. And then I went to the internet of, let me look up these schools that I picked. Let me look up who the faculty are in their clinical psych program and what the topics they're researching. If I had any interest, that's when I would send a cold email, because they often don't know if they're taking a student. And currently, because they get like, some of these programs get like 2,000 applicants a cycle, they don't want you to cold email them. They find it like very off-putting. And they also have like, they don't want to bias themselves, so they discourage it. So I would reach out to actually students in the lab, or the lab manager, or someone else affiliated with that faculty, because I don't want to annoy the faculty member that I'm applying to, and kind of like try to learn more, like, what's the vibe like? What's the lab culture? Do you like your mentor? What's your relationship? How much do you publish? Like, when people graduate from your lab, where do they go? So I would source the people around the PI, who's the person you're applying to. And then that's kind of how I narrowed down my list. But I had a super comprehensive, very detailed spreadsheet, and that is going to be that's the number one thing to anybody who's recommending you should have one of these master spreadsheets. And I'm happy to share my template. I got it from a friend who was applying to medical school, and I have since shared it with people applying to residency. And it just is, that's the best way to, it organizes all your notes and thoughts about why each program, what the topic is, because there aren't enough researchers doing the one specific thing you want to do. You have to be a little flexible, like, oh, I can see myself doing this for 5 years, or like, oh, this person's doing this. I can like braid in my own research into their existing research. You got to be cognitively flexible with what you're willing to do, because at the end of the day, you just need to get in. Like, do whatever you can do, because you just need to get through the door. And once you're in the program, you have a lot more flexibility to kind of do what you want, craft the kind of research you want to craft, go in different directions. But like, first and foremost, you gotta fit in. So I'm happy to talk about what that process is. And I completely kind of camouflaged myself every single time I applied in a different way until I figured out that just right combination. So that was my approach. Very strategic.
Awesome. Thank you. And then next up is Nadia.
Just, I guess, one thing to add to all the advice that people have been giving. I think for me, what was really helpful was, when I was reading papers, I would look up like the first author, but also like the senior author of each paper, right? So usually the senior author is the like PI or professor, right, who's running the lab. So what I found is, like the name of the senior author keeps popping up, right? Like the same sets of names, right, keep popping up in this pile of papers that I've been reading, right? Because I keep wanting to read something kind of like, related concepts, right? And for me, it was like cognitive neuroscience. So I kept like writing down or like making note to myself as to who to like what labs to look up. And another thing that I did was that, now there's probably more videos out there, right? Because a lot of professors would give talks at conferences. And for me, emailing people is an option, but also if you want like a quick check of personality match and things like that, right? You can also look at the way people give talks and answering questions during Q&A. So for me, that was really helpful. So I think like reading and, like making note to yourself on like the faculty names and also like looking at their talks on YouTube was really helpful for me.
Awesome. Thank you. And to end the questions is Jamal, before we're going to bring her. So make it good. No.
Yeah. I think Daphna really brought up like a really important point. I think that the program and the advisors that you're applying to are really going to tailor the way that you reach out to people, the way that you tailor your application, and the way that you tailor almost literally everything about the way that you pursue a particular career. Because I was listening to her experiences, and it sounded eerily similar to an RA that I had worked with who really wanted to get into clinical work. And I was like, I don't know how to help you, because it's so different in the more experimental research role, where it is when you get into a PhD program in the experimental psychological realms, it is far more like an apprenticeship. And so it is super valuable to be able to reach out to the grad students, the postdocs in that lab, but you certainly want to be reaching out to the PI. And that is like, to be clear, like that is not at all saying that that's like not what you should do if you're doing a clinical program. You should certainly listen to Daphna because that is like, clinical programs are like a totally different beast. And if you're interested in more of the experimental, like strictly research vibe, it is going to be much more like the experiences that me or like Dania or Nadia maybe had, where you're going to reach out maybe more directly to the PI. It's certainly going to be valuable to reach out to the students because they're going to tell you what the PI is like. And additionally, the PI is going to tell you like, yes, I'm accepting students. No, I'm not accepting students. It's much less institutional based and much more based on the PI themselves and what the funding that they have. And so when I thought about the programs or the topics that I would pursue, because the experimental psychology realm is so focused on that apprenticeship style, I looked at all sorts of top universities in the United States and said, what professors are here that are doing stuff that I'm interested in? Because our relationship is so much more like one-to-one. They're going to guide me and turn me into a scientist, a good scientist. And they're either going to, depending on their style, turn me into an exact replica of themselves, which is extremely common. Or the other, slightly more nuanced version is they're going to turn me into the best version of the scientist that I'd like to be. And I applied to 11 programs across the United States. I was far less geographically constrained, but there are people in my lab and there are people that I've mentored and helped that are more geographically constrained, like Dalia explained, and like Dani explained, like you can get into great programs without having that geographical openness. But I looked at all sorts of different universities, but primarily I was more interested in the PIs that were doing research there. Are they doing interesting work? And that narrowed it down to 20 people. And like Daphna, I had a huge spreadsheet and it said what sort of work they did. I also tried to look for at least 2 PIs because it's not uncommon for a PI to move universities and transfer. The person that I came here for, Dr. Viola Stormer, moved to Dartmouth because her partner works at Dartmouth and they have a family together. And Dartmouth offered her and her husband a tenure track position that UCSD wasn't capable of offering. And it was really tough to like lose her guidance and lose her, the help that she gives me on a day-to-day in-person basis. But I had picked 2 advisors. And so one of them stayed here, she moved around. And so in the experimental realm, it was really important that I picked people that were really interested in what I wanted to do. And in my spreadsheet, I had the PIs, what they were interested in, what sort of funding the school offered, how many grad students they had. It was also kind of important to have like a diverse group of grad students. I'm from Los Angeles, and so having like a diverse group of people is just kind of the norm for me. And when things get really kind of like monocultural in any sort of sense, it's just like a little uncomfortable. So all of those sorts of questions are things that you can look up on their websites. You can reach out to the PIs and the grad students and find out. And once I found people that were interested in the topics and they seemed like good fits, I emailed them. Are you accepting grad students? Do you have funding for a grad student? What do summers look like? What do all this stuff look like? And I filled that into my spreadsheet because I wanted to make sure that this big decision I was making was going to be best for me and my partner. And I think I made a great decision, and really all you can do is try and take all of that information and then let your subconscious make a good decision. And that's why I think, to echo Daphna's point, like putting it into a spreadsheet is so important because it is just impossible for your conscious mind to really process all of that stuff. Put it aside. It seems like too organizational, maybe too much at first, but putting that all information aside once you've figured it out and being able to just reference it is so valuable. And so all of that stuff really helped me to be able to say, this is the program I want to pick, even after interviews, doing all of this stuff, flying across the country, being jet lagged, meeting hundreds of new people. And you just put that all the stuff aside into your spreadsheet and you review it as those sorts of questions come up in your mind. Anyway, that's my rambly addition to what were some really fantastic answers before me.
Yeah, thank you. I think Jamal lived up to the the call of ending the answers. And before we move into the breakout rooms, I just want to give the panelists a round of applause so everyone can hit the applause button in the reactions or just clap your hands. Thank you guys so much. It's really a wonderful set of answers. So let me skip forward to the hold on. Oh, I went too far. This is what I want. Okay, so yeah. So if there's gonna be 3 rooms, and so if Leslie and Nutita could join room 1, and then Daphna and Dalia in room 2, and Jamal and Danya in room 3. And so for the audience, you can join whichever room you want to, and then oh wait, I have a script for this. I should be reading the script. Whoops. All right. Yeah. Anyways, and when you're as an audience member, please feel free to join one of the rooms. And remember to please be respectful of everyone in the room and use the raise hand function, which can be found under the reactions tab. And the panelists will moderate the rooms and they'll call on you. And just again, please, like you guys have been doing such a good job during this panel, please remember to stay muted when it's not your turn. And so these rooms will last about 20 minutes, and then we'll bring everyone back together for a final thank you. And the rooms are open, so you guys can go ahead and join all the rooms. And then Gina and I will just pop in to make sure everything is going great.